Nah, not really. Yeah, anticlimactic, I know. There was a lot of people who've been asking for the Forsaken video for ages and ages and ages, so much so that I honestly thought that I was going to end up doing a game review on it, something that I haven't done in a very long time. But, unfortunately, the game is honestly so sort of bare bones that I feel like I couldn't even do a game review if I wanted to. There's not a whole lot going on in this game. That said, what is there is pretty fun. So, to answer the question of, does it suck? Well, no, not really. It's definitely a game in its own right. It takes a lot of liberties and inspiration from both past games on Roblox, as well as other games that are currently popular, most notably Dead by Daylight, which, just for the record, I called this game a Dead by Daylight clone off the cuff a while ago in a Q&A, and I had a lot of people that were disputing that, and they were like, it's not a Dead by Daylight clone, how is it a Dead by Daylight clone? And I have to ask, like, have you guys ever watched or played Dead by Daylight before? Because you gotta be kidding me, right? This is a joke? You've got a group of survivors versus a singular killer. Both the killer and the group of survivors have a series of skills that can make it either easier or harder to survive or kill the other survivors. And there's a series of generators around the map where you need to play a mini game in order to activate them so that way you can escape the killer. I guess the difference here being that there's a timer rather than directly a way to leave and escape the killer. And I mean, obviously there are nuances and differences between this game and Dead by Daylight, but are we fucking serious, guys? Like, let's drop the BS here. This game is pretty obviously just Roblox Dead by Daylight, and anyone who's trying to tell you otherwise is on some serious copium. That said, to be clear, this isn't a notoriety situation. It's not like they just took Dead by Daylight, took all of their maps, took all their mechanics, took all of their killers, survivors, you get the idea, and just cloned them and put them into Roblox. So I'm not gonna come on here and say, they can't do this, it's stolen, because it isn't. But we gotta be honest with ourselves. Roblox Dead by Daylight, that's what Forsaken is. Anyways, with that out of the way, I want to talk about the game itself and how, honestly, I was sort of disappointed, but also surprised. First of all, I already said it, but this game is legitimately fun to play in the same way that it was legitimately fun to play things like Roblox Murder back in the day. These simple one versus many type of games where the one is supposed to take out the many are always going to be fun in some capacity, and that's absolutely still true here. And obviously it has the caveat of it not being completely hopeless when you're on the survivors team, as you have skills to defend yourself and also teamwork where you can work together with your different teammates and what classes that they decide to play in order to make it either easier or harder to deal with the killer. That's one of the things that I think is a problem with a lot of the one versus many game modes, where if you're on the innocent team, you're just kind of helpless. And that's something that I think is done really well in games like Trouble in Terrorist Town, where the traitors and the innocents both have the same capabilities, or I guess technically the traitors usually have more capabilities, being able to have buy shops and stuff like that. But either way, the point is the traitors and the innocents are generally on the same power playing field, and so it's more about deception and then player skill when the fighting actually opens up, rather than just a free shooting gallery for the traitors to go around killing everyone until maybe some of the innocents get lucky. I would say Forsaken does a decent job treading the line between the killer being extremely overpowered, whereas it's still fun to play them, and also not just completely helpless on the innocents team. Now, that said, I have no fucking clue why there are like 200,000 people playing this game. I'm sorry, maybe this will be a controversial take, but I don't get it. There is one gameplay loop in the game, and that's pretty much it. And every single server that I joined, which I frequented several just for the sake of trying to get a good idea of how different lobbies played, over the roughly 2.5 hours that I played this game, it was always the same in every server I joined, and it was one of two things. Either you had a completely inexperienced survivor team that would get wiped out by the killer immediately and had absolutely no chance, and then that would happen over and over and over and over again, with the survivors being basically completely helpless because one or two experienced survivors is just not enough to carry a game. Or you'd have the complete opposite, where you had a large group of experienced players, which means you had a large group of experienced survivors, and even when an experienced player got the killer, if they were going up against several experienced survivors who were working together to constantly stall out the killer, it became nearly impossible for the killer to win, and they would lose over and over and over and over again. There were a couple servers that I ended up joining where I managed to break a stalemate of like 5 or 6 survivor victories in a row, only because I managed to outplay the survivors and play well, and even then it was by the skin of my teeth because I was getting barraged with bullshit constantly. Because that's the other thing. Playing as the killer against an inept survivor crew is a power trip where you basically just go on a murdering spree and kill everyone for free and they have no chance. It's kind of fun, I'll be honest, but it's not really that in-depth. That said, on the flip side, playing against an experienced survivor team is nothing short of frustrating. I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but it is really annoying to constantly get peppered with BS and landmines and shields and projectiles and all this nonsense over and over and over and over and over again while you're trying to take out the people, knowing full well that there's 1 or 2 people all the way back in the boonies activating the generators to decrease the timer, which is just going to actively screw you over. And to be clear, I'm not saying that it's impossible to win these situations. I won several, but it also just isn't very much fun to get poked and prodded over and over and over again. And really that's what happens. And like I said, with some of the even mediocre experienced killers, what tends to happen in these survivor focused lobbies is that you'll have 4 or 5 people just stalling out the killer, and then 1 or 2 people running around activating all of the generators for free because the killer's so busy getting harassed that there's nothing they can really do. And so by the time the killer actually takes out 1 or 2 of the people to increase the timer, well, by that point, the generators have all been activated and they've only got like a minute to take out 6, 7 people who are all working together. Good luck with that. So anyways, the point is, I just don't really see why so many people find this gameplay loop entertaining when it's basically one of 2 things and borderline no difference in between those things. Maybe I just got really unlucky, but I'd like to think that 6 or 7 lobbies over 2.5 hours is a decent sample size for it to be the exact same over and over and over again. That's probably a pretty good indicator. And honestly, sometimes it can only get worse because in those killer-focused lobbies, what tends to happen is that a lot of people leave. And if they leave, there doesn't appear to be anything to help out the survivors if there's less of them. So then the killer absolutely wins for free because a killer versus 3 survivors, I mean, come on, that shit's over. They have no chance. Anyways, to loop back around to good things, because that's what I'm gonna try to do. I'm gonna try to go back and forth on things I liked and then things I didn't like and then wrap up the video, because I don't want people to take away from this that I was really mad, salty, and hate everything, or the opposite, where I was just glazing the whole thing, because it's very much in between. That said, one of the things that I really liked about this game is the restraint that they ended up showing when it comes to just microtransactions in general, because I was blown away. I'm so used to playing these stupid asymmetrical games where you've got like 500 Robux, become the killer instantly, or like stun all of the survivors, 500 Robux, screw them all over, pay some money, come on. I mean, we're in the age where people pay actively to take other people's stuff. They pay Robux to take other people's things. So this is just sort of what I expect at this point. So when I went into the Forsaken store and all that was in there was a VIP that doesn't affect your killer chance at all and a 2x emotes thing, I was kind of floored. Not only was I kind of floored by that, but the grind in terms of making money in order to unlock things is really not that bad. There isn't some like 999 money killer that's extremely overpowered and impossible to unlock. No, not by a long shot. All of the killers and survivors are affordable, and while buying one is gonna set you back and then it's gonna take a while for you to recoup that, I think that's fine since you get a pick of almost anything. I ended up buying the most expensive killer on display just because I thought it looked interesting when someone was using it against me and I wanted to try it out, and I was able to do that just in the short period that I played. I feel like in a free-to-play game, being able to unlock a survivor class and a killer class in just 2.5 hours is extremely generous. They could have been extremely greedy here, they weren't, and that should be commended. And in terms of the developers doing a great job, I also want to talk about the fact that the settings on display here are truly something else. This is one of those things that I feel like falls by the wayside and a lot of people don't consider, but having all of these settings here, each one of these is extra work for the developers that they don't have to put in, but they did in order to make a customizable experience for everyone who wants to play. Just about any effect, visual effect, or sound effect that will be in the game has some sort of toggle or thing to change how it works in this screen, and that's incredible. Of course, on top of the ability to rebind any of the keys that you have in order to make them whatever you want them to be, and this is just fantastic. Put simply, developers need more credit for giving you stuff like this in their games. Unfortunately, while they gave us a whole lot of information in terms of settings, they didn't do a very good job of giving us a whole lot of information on how the game works. This is something people warned me about, so I knew about it already coming in, and boy oh boy did it not disappoint. This game throws you in and basically says, good luck, not explaining any of the mechanics to you whatsoever. Would it have been too much for them to have put a little B-game slideshow right at the beginning of the game to just tell you quickly how the basic mechanics of the game work? Would it be too much to ask the 200,000 player base, 2.7 billion visit game to program in some sort of tutorial when you first launch it up to explain the mechanics of survivors and killers? My answer is obviously not. No. And the fact that this doesn't exist is kind of criminal. Come on, guys, you have so much resources to work with and you give them nothing? But it gets worse, because even if you're like me and you figure out everything that's going on pretty quickly, killer needs to kill people, uses skills to do that. Every time they get a kill, the timer goes up. If you activate the generators, the timer goes down. It's not rocket science, so it's only gonna take a game or two, you know, if you're even remotely competent. But the problem is that there are some things in here that aren't just directly related to gameplay, that aren't explained and require, I repeat, require you to look them up to understand how they work, which is fucking stupid. What I'm referring to are the status effects in the game, of which there are a ton of. Seriously, I'll be scrolling through them right now, but look at all of these status effects. Holy shit. So you'd think with all of these status effects in the game that obviously the game is going to tell you what they do, right? Right? Fucking wrong. No, it doesn't tell you at all what any of them do anywhere. And that's a pretty large problem when you're looking through the menus and the game tells you that someone is going to be inflicted with a certain status effect, but you don't know what the status effect even does. How hard would it have been to put in a status effect screen? If you have the time to put this big old screen with all of the settings, how did you not also have somewhere to explain to people what everything does? Furthermore, could you not have just told people what the status effect does in the description of the move where it's being used? There are walls of text here. Clearly, you guys are not afraid of putting walls of text where you need to read a shitload of things in order to understand how all of the moves work. Because you do a decent job of explaining all of the moves in here, but you don't tell us what the status effects do, so you have no clue. Why? And I already know there's gonna be a couple people that are gonna be like, well, Eclipse, if you can't figure out what poisoned does or slowness does, you're an idiot. All right, well, how about helpless? The helpless status effect. For anyone who hasn't played this game, what the fuck do you think helpless does? Any clue? Anywhere to start? No, of course not. There's no way for you to know what this does. Well, I'll tell you. What it does is disable people's ability to use their abilities. Who in their right mind, without any previous knowledge, is gonna look at something that says applies helpless for 5 seconds and goes, oh, that must disable their abilities? No! It's asinine, it's stupid, and it should be explained in the game, but it isn't. And when a game's been played 2.7 billion times, there becomes no excuse. This needs to be somewhere because there is zero reason you should have to go to the wiki or get killed by something several times to figure out what the fuck is going on. It shouldn't happen. Plain and simple. All right, so I just shit on that a lot. Let's get on to something more positive. Let's talk killer gameplay, because killer gameplay is super fun, for the most part in this game. As I mentioned, I played 2 of the killers in the game. The first one you get, the slasher, and the last one that's the most expensive, the 1x, 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 1x killer. Now obviously both of these killers had a somewhat different playstyle, but they're also similar enough that if you've played one, you'll be familiar with the other. One of the things that I can appreciate a lot is the fact that the first killer in the game is absolutely no slouch, and is actually really strong. I expected to come in, have the first killer, and basically stand no chance. That said, when I actually got to playing and figured out how all of the moves worked, I was pretty easily able to clean people up, especially when baiting people into doing something stupid and then hitting them with this dismemberment move that does a ridiculous amount of damage. The slasher doesn't really have too much good stuff in terms of applying status effects and just disabling enemies' abilities to do things aside from its one beheading move. That said, they're able to do a ton of damage up close if they're able to land their moves, and I generally just had a great time playing as them. And it became even more fun when I decided to use 1x because they have an entirely different playstyle, relying on 2 different projectiles that you can use to mess with and slow down the survivors, along with the glitched effect where if you hit them, all of their things get scrambled so they can't see stuff like how much stamina they have, which is really important because if you run out of stamina, then it takes longer to come back. Something the game should explain to you, but of course it doesn't, and I'm not going to get into that. Either way, the point is the longer I played and the more that I dealt with different survivors, the more I learned about how to deal with them. And so certain things that seemed like they were extremely overused and felt overpowered at times, like the guest survivor, ended up just becoming pushovers and extremely easy to bait later, where I would just wait till they stupidly blocked like an idiot because they're an idiot and killed them while they were sitting there defenseless. Once you start to get the hang of target acquisition and realizing who you need to kill first and who you need to prioritize, it's an incredibly interesting gameplay loop. That said, what isn't an interesting gameplay loop is the vast majority of Survivor gameplay. I mentioned earlier that the Survivor gameplay in this game is notably better than in games like Roblox Murder. That said, yeah, it's still got some problems, and I think the most notable one stems from the fact that if you want to win this game, you gotta be activating generators. That's just the way it is. The default timer, I think, is 3 or 4 minutes, and every time that the killer gets a kill, it extends by like 35, 40 seconds. So if you're not activating generators to actively lower the timer, you're basically screwed. You're not surviving 3 minutes. Now, I mentioned earlier that in all of the games where the survivors steamrolled, you had a bunch of people harassing the killer and a couple people activating generators. What I didn't mention is that there were several games where I was basically the only person activating generators, and I knew that if I didn't do this, there was no chance that we would win. Now, the problem is that activating generators is one, I repeat, one singular minigame every game forever. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty decent minigame. I don't mind it. In fact, I found it pretty fun at times, and it was enjoyable to get better at it. Unfortunately, because there's one minigame in this game with 2.7 billion visits, yeah, it can get pretty boring pretty quickly. And so I can't even really blame these people for just deciding to harass the killer the entire game instead of doing the generators, because doing the generators is fucking boring. It's the same every single time. And I'm sorry, but I don't think it's that tall of an ask for a 2 million player game to have more than one mini game for the survivors to play. Like, listen, do we want a less fun game or a more fun game? Because if you're about to go to the comments and be like, I think it's fine, then you're advocating for a less fun game. What's wrong with you? And really, I think a lot of that wraps up most of what I wanted to say. Initially, I was going to talk about the general lack of content in terms of the amount of killers in the game, as I think there was only 4 when I played, which was a little bit baffling, but I think the killers that are there are fine. I'm sure there'll be more later. I think that there should be more based off of the player count, and I'm going to continue to use the player count to explain to people that when you have that many players, you have a ton of resources, and you should expect those kinds of player count games to use those resources to make a better game. The bar should not be set at Blox Fruit, where you make millions of dollars and then you put out an update once a year. That is a shitty bar, and we should not settle for that. Now, unfortunately, I have a bad feeling and a sinking suspicion, and this is entirely conjecture and based off of nothing, that a lot of the updates for this game are buffs and nerfs to certain effects and things on survivors and killers, rather than focusing on actual content. And if that is the case, this is a just PSA to the developers behind this game, please God, stop meticulously balancing your inherently unbalanced game and actually give people more interesting stuff to use. Obviously, if the whole game is just using one thing, that's a problem, but you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours theory crafting on why something may or may not be balanced when you could be using that time to add more stuff to the game and make it feel less bare bones. For God's sakes, there's one game mode. Literally one game mode. I once again feel like it's not a tall ask to ask for the potential of having more than one game mode. Anyways, that's it. We're wrapping up here. I expect this video to get a good amount of hate from people because Forsaken is extremely popular, and me making a video that's actively critical of it, even though I had fun playing the game, is inevitably going to get hate. So if you are going to leave the hate comment, please keep it measured and don't just yell a bunch of words, because if you yell a bunch of words, nobody's going to care and you've wasted your time. With that, I am done. So if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.